All right, the investigation into President Autopen, getting to the bottom of that garbage. That seems very important. And my next guest, well, he specializes in getting to the bottom of garbage. He's the president over at Judicial Watch. You do it all the time, Tom Fitton.
That is true.
Great
That's
to see
true.
you here,
That's
man.
what I always think.
It's always nice to see you. Hey, this seems like a big deal. This seems like a way bigger deal, I think, than people appreciate. Certainly that the media appreciates. I'm watching the New York Times this morning just to give you a laugh. They're saying this is all a conspiracy theory, a baseless conspiracy theory that Biden was non-compos mentis.
Yeah, we've got a book now by Jake Tapper. And, of course, everyone witnessed it with their own eyes, right? So that's the problem the media has. Everyone knows there was something going on, and he may not have been able to run the show. And you can't really have your cake and eat it, too. You can't have the Justice Department ratify a decision by the special counsel. We can't prosecute him because, obviously, he has failing memory.
Right.
And if that wasn't the position of the Justice Department, why didn't they prosecute Biden, just reject the special counsel's recommendation?
Yes.
Based on the documents. So, and then you look at the pardons themselves, they're mighty strange. There have really been few similar pardons in American history. Maybe the Nixon pardon was similarly broad, but suspicious nevertheless, where you've had pardons for numerous people close to Biden that didn't specify crimes. And going back 10 years. Now, who came up with that
11
solution?
in some cases.
Yeah,
They went back very specifically.
And who came up with that solution? And when you look at, by the way, the pardon statement related to Hunter, clearly it was written by Hunter's lawyers. So, null and void to begin with, as far as I'm concerned. Then on top of that, who signed them, right? And our friends at Heritage Oversight, they highlighted the issue of the autopens. Now, autopens can be used by a president.
Yep.
But there's got to be a paper trail. There has to be authorization. And I would argue specific authorization for each usage. I don't think you can generally just give away those core presidential powers as Biden may have done in this regard. And to me, the paper trail ought to be pretty readily apparent. And if there is no paper trail, it lends further suspicion that these pardons are null and void.
You know, one thing that, like I mentioned the New York Times covers, they're saying, I'm already seeing kind of how they're working up their talking points. Well, no pardon's ever been overturned by a court. There's never been a process for that. They're basically saying, so that it's so novel, the idea that you would overturn a pardon.
I got a plan.
Well, wait a second. Everything about this entire scheme was novel. Like, this is the violations themselves were novel. So, of course, you have to take a novel approach to redress them.
You should proceed as if the pardons are null and void. Let the defendants raise it as a defense in court. Litigate it. A pardon about nothing to me is unenforceable. So what are they even going to be fighting over? And certainly the crimes associated with the pardon recipients can be investigated. They can be questioned. And you don't necessarily target someone who has been pardoned, but you don't let the pardon stop you from figuring out what crimes are associated with their conduct and then potentially prosecuting them.
So if you have evidence that Fauci committed a crime, start the prosecution. If you have evidence that, of course, we had lots of evidence that Hunter Biden committed crimes, although in Hunter's case, that was hand-signed by Joe. We know that signature is different than the autopen signatures. So in that sense, unfortunately, perhaps for those of us who want to see justice there, that one seems to stand. But
well,
part
of the pardon seems to stand. Now, the Hunter Biden pardon has elements that seem valid, specific violations of law for which he's being pardoned.
Right.
Then you have this section that, and anything else he may have done in the last 10 or 11 years, as you point out.
Well, that's an unusual, that's never been done before, not that expansive.
No, and Nixon had a kind of a broad pardon like that, and people were questioning whether it was sufficient or not, given the broad nature, or appropriate.
Right.
And when you look at the history of pardons, one could argue, and there's been certain court findings to this effect, that the pardon doesn't stop you even from being put on trial. It just stops you from being punished. So you can arguably go through the entire process, and to the degree the pardon is valid, it just stops you from going to jail, but you're found guilty.
Right. Yeah. So you think that it's possible they could still be subjected to the court process just for a fact-finding mission?
In the least. I would test it with Milley. I think there's questions of fraud related and perjury related to Fauci. And the whole family, the Biden family, there's criminality that needs to be fully vetted as well. And it should be no bar to prosecutions. No, and in the least, no bar to investigations. And I feel that they're, my concern is the administration is kind of walking around these core issues, though. Is there going to be a serious investigation of any of these issues I'm talking about?
This is what I wanted to ask you about next, because here's what we've seen. We've seen infamously on the right. We've seen a lot of fact-finding missions that don't result in accountability action, right? So big congressional investigations that give us a bunch of horrifying answers. And then everyone is not charged because, well, it's outside of the statute of limitations. It happened a long time ago. Somebody already caught a wrist slap or whatever. Kevin Kleinsmith gets to stampede all over the law, and there's no accountability for him. So here's my worry about this, and it sounds to me like you're sharing it, that the president's asking for a full-blown investigation into this, and then we're going to get some sort of, spiral-bound report without the kind of accountability that you and I want.
I can do an investigation.
You do this all the time.
Right,
You don't have prosecuting ability, so you just
we
do
don't we don't need the government to do, quote, an investigation. We need the government to do, as you say, a prosecution. And what if I were the president, I would just have a separate investigative prosecutorial unit outside the FBI and Justice Department. I know Dan and Cash probably want to get into some of this as to what the FBI did in the past.
Yeah.
I don't think the FBI can investigate the FBI and the DOJ, especially on lawfare. They're compromised and conflicted. And I would we kind of just need to get it done. It was last year they tried to destroy our republic by jailing our president.
Yes.
And I'm not seeing any urgency to figure out who should be held accountable for violating the civil rights of Trump and anyone else.
At the top of this program, I played, perhaps you've seen the clip of Dan on Hannity last night.
Which one?
There was a clip. In fact, the one that he said, this is the one that he said, bookmark this.
Oh, I did see
this
that
morning, and the bookmark this one was him being asked a question by Sean about about Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Fannie Willis, and Nathan Wade, and he said, I can't get ahead of what the Justice Department is doing right now on that issue, so I really can't give you more answers on this. But just again, Dan is emphasizing that area. So if you're looking at the people who actually did go after Trump and tried to rob him of his civil rights in that way, that's definitely the cabal that they're talking about.
Well, you would think, but I'm not seeing any evidence that they're actually doing a criminal investigation of that cabal. And if they were, I think we'd see evidence. The cabal would be screaming about it.
Yeah.
Remember, after January 6th, what happened? The Biden people came in and they went to town. They went after all of these folks related to January 6th.
Yes, they did.
They made it clear there are ongoing criminal investigations, who were the targets, there were arrests, subpoenas issued, very public. And I'm sorry, I don't think all of this is being done in secret. I don't think it's being done. I think they're kind of circling around the issues. There may be some prosecutions, but I just don't see the comprehensive.
Well, we know
comprehensive reform and oversight and prosecution.
We know that the mortgage fraud case against Letitia James is real, and they're actually doing that. So that's part of this. I mean, there's definitely some investigative action going on against her. But that broader theme of, are these guys lawyering up because the Justice Department is breathing down their necks? You're saying, well, I just haven't seen the public evidence for that right now.
Where's the grand jury? And I'm sorry, it has been, they keep on saying it's only been 3 months or 4 months. Actually, that's a long time. It's a long time. And
to build a case?
It's a long time to not do anything publicly. And I'm not seeing evidence that's being done. And I don't trust the FBI and DOJ to be able to do it, because they're going to have to investigate themselves if they seriously want to get it done. Who in the FBI was involved in the raid on Trump's home?
Right.
Who's going to investigate the FBI's involvement?
Yes.
Who in the DOJ was involved? Who's going to be investigating the DOJ?
So what would you recommend? What would be the approach?
I would have a separate investigative unit set up by the prosecutor-in-chief, our president. Appoint a special counsel who is answerable to him, and he should manage the investigation and the prosecutions, and have other agency or outside contractors detailed to provide support to do the sort of comprehensive analysis and investigation, and if necessary, prosecution. Under our Constitution, Donald Trump could go into the courtroom and prosecute a case if need be.
Is this something that you've recommended to him?
I don't say what I say or don't say
to
anybody in the White House. I've been very public.
Well, you're publicly recommending
it.
Right. So
if Donald Trump is watching this, dear Mr. President, my favorite president, this is something he should do.
Okay, so let me ask you.
I am officially recommending it on Vince's podcast.
Okay,
today.
good. So we have an official recommendation to the president here. On the flip side of it, do you anticipate that this is something he would do?
I would argue that if he doesn't do it, he's going to be prosecuted as soon as he gets out of office.
They really want to hurt him.
They've
done it.
In my view, the FBI has to be a husk of its former self and should be treated like USAID. We shouldn't be talking about trying to get people hired at the FBI and letting cops be cops. The FBI has proven itself a menace to our First Amendment rights and a tool of any president who comes into town who has their sights on their opponents as opposed to the rule of law. And it's too much of a threat. They've proven themselves incapable of doing the job that Americans expect them to do and can't be trusted.
Yeah, and also, one of the things we've discovered already through both Cash and Dan, who I am sincerely grateful are in that role. I mean, if there's anybody who's going to be there who I'd have any kind of confidence in, it's those two.
I agree.
And they say right up front, you've been hearing from Dan lately, he repeated it last night, that they're finding rooms full of information that was meant to be concealed. So what that means is that they still have a huge active problem inside of the Bureau that they're tackling in the midst of trying to keep the country safe.
This is why you need outsiders to come in and do the audits, do a forensic analysis of the documents or the storage devices they have in there.
Yeah.
Dan can't do it all on his own.
No.
I mean, Dan highlights all the work he's doing on other law enforcement matters, and I think it kind of takes pressure off of them to focus on the kind of the current crises, and you have a separate agency or office reporting to the president who's doing the cleanup in aisle 6.
Yeah, yeah. Ed Martin seems like he's really focused.
Ed could do it.
This.
There are all sorts of people you could appoint as special counsel. Move someone over from DOJ or bring in an outsider. DOJ, with all due respect to the leadership of the FBI and the Justice Department, we know how it works. They go in. The bureaucracy is quite adept at focusing them on where they want to focus
and
explaining why it is they can't do what they want to do.
Yep.
And creating interesting issues for them to pursue that they know they're going to be interested in. And meanwhile, things just keep on going the way they've been going in large measure. I'm not seeing any Doge going on at the FBI to any great extent. Have you?
Doge, meaning the canning people?
The approach, the Doge approach. No, they've been canning some people who've been affiliated with some of the prior abuses.
Yes.
But none of the traditional Doge approach for waste, fraud, and abuse. Same at the DOJ. And, the FBI has, 38,000 people working for it?
Right. And they're recruiting more. They're trying to get more agents in.
Look, at the end of the day, the only remaining person at the FBI should be Kash Patel and a few assistants as they're basically shutting the lights off. That's what my view is. And so, I kind of want them to do investigations as best as they're able. But, let's not be naive about the way things have been going. What's the best indication of future behavior by political and administrative agencies?
Past performance. Yeah,
that's right. It's the exact opposite for the stock market, right?
Yes, that's right. No, that's true. Okay, let me ask you about what would happen if Democrats get control of the House. They've got right now. Jasmine Crockett, one of the leaders of the party, is saying that it's time for impeachment again. And I'm seeing Axios has a report up this morning that, Democrats disagree, and this is giving them agita, and they don't. It's my view that the second they get a hold on power again, they're once again impeaching President Trump for a third time.
Oh, yeah, in the least. You can be sure there'll be charges. You can see them circling around allegations of criminality associated with Trump and his family, fake allegations, but they don't need much to start charging him. So I don't think it's going to be limited to impeachment. And remember, they wanted to get him killed last time around. You had Benny Thompson put a bill forward that would have denied him Secret Service protection if he was sent to Rikers, which would have been a death sentence.
Yes.
These guys, and who did they use to go after him? It was the FBI and DOJ. And I was joking with Bannon a few weeks ago. I said it was Trump's DOJ that tried to put him in jail effectively. So let's not think that we have to wait for Democrats to come in order for us to be at risk. You could have a Republican president succeed President Trump, assuming Trump's term is limited to just 2. And we could have a DOJ, we got to, do what Trump is now doing with Biden, right?
Right. Yeah. Leakers, deceivers, saboteurs. We saw all of that in Trump 1. and now we, very much a risk.
And we still don't have the documents. We're in it for the documents initially, right? And FBI is stalling documents to us. DOJ is stalling documents to us.
They're still stalling to you now?
Yeah.
So I know that one thing that the document production has ramped up from the FBI is to Congress. I know that those guys who've been asking for documents have been getting at a pretty rapid clip relative to what it's been in the past. A lot of the Crossfire Hurricane, all that stuff is showing up in Congress, which is good news.
Well,
but
we sued for the Crossfire Hurricane 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we haven't gotten one document. Well, I shouldn't say one document, but we haven't gotten the documents.
You haven't gotten what you wanted.
Yeah.
And so what's the answer for that?
I think they should
what are they saying? Obviously, I would imagine that the relationship you have now must be a better one, that it's more of a good faith relationship. But
we've gotten
are they giving you excuses?
like the DOJ has given us documents we typically wouldn't have gotten. For instance, on the Hurd tapes.
Yes.
They gave us documents showing the White House was trying to change the transcript literally to make it seem like he didn't forget his son's death.
Yes.
The year of his son's death. And that material typically would never be released under FOIA. So there was that positive step. But typically it's the same old, same old. We're not getting any faster responses to our pending FOIA lawsuits and litigation. And, and I would recommend they just follow a FOIA process in releasing records. The problem they had with Epstein and the JFK records, both of which we've sued on since then,
right,
is that they kind of did public leaks. And the problem when you do a public leak, and I don't want to say I'm against transparency, but people say, well, where did you look? What are you withholding?
Right.
And the only way to make sure you know what's happening in that regard is through litigation, the FOIA process. And so I would encourage them to follow the FOIA process. Don't make it the enemy of the good in the sense of pretending that the FOIA process gets in the way of releasing records, because the decisions so when Dan gets on TV and says, we're looking at the videos of the Epstein
the hallway,
scene,
the corridor,
right, and we want to clean them up, we're like, well, just give us the we asked for these documents 2 months ago.
Right.
So if you're going to release them, release them. You clean them up later. Do whatever you want with them later, but we want the records.
Yeah.
Where are those records? You keep on referencing records you're seeing or sending to Congress. The public isn't seeing these records. Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's because they're kind of running, they're kind of in an emergency maybe there's an emergency aspect.
And we won't know until we see that video what it is that they'd actually have to clean up, because it sounds to me like typically video footage, especially if it's a security camera, you could release it, but there must be some underlying reason. Again, in Dan's case, I'm not distrusting. I'm perfectly fine with him saying that. But I'm with you on the transparency.
Yeah, it's not a question of whether I like Dan or not. It's like I just know the way the agencies work.
Yes.
And the FBI, I've been doing this at Judicial Watch for almost 30 years. And, don't piss down my leg and tell me it's raining.
For sure, yes.
Yeah. The FBI, I'm not seeing any evidence of a real systemic criminal prosecution or investigation of the lawfare. I'm not seeing an understanding that they need to really deal on an urgent basis with releasing and disclosing information about what went on. And frankly, the FBI should be treated like Japan at the end of World War II. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, we're not going to leave you ever able to do what you did to us again.
Yes, your governance will never look the same again. That's true. That happened in Japan. Okay, last thing. I know that you're concerned about election integrity.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big focus for you. That matters a great deal. If this whole system's going to keep going, people have to have faith in our elections. What's the latest for you?
Well, the Supreme Court's going to take up a big case of ours. We sued in Illinois for a congressman, Mike Bost, and 2 electors in Illinois. They count ballots that arrive for up to 2 weeks after Election Day in Illinois. And we had a similar lawsuit in Mississippi, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said, Judicial Watch is right here.
Yeah.
Our clients are right. Counting ballots arrive after Election Day is contrary to federal law, which sets an election day, not election week. But in Illinois, they didn't even want to deal with the merits. They said the congressman, the candidate, had no standing to challenge the illegal counting of ballots. So we appealed. We lost the appeal. It was a split appeal 2-1, which suggests that maybe we were on, that was a bad decision. And the Supreme Court this week said they're going to take up our case. So they're going to consider whether essentially federal candidates can go into court and try to stop an election from being stolen.
Yes. Well, I mean, you would think they would be the injured party.
You would think.
You know.
So I'm knock on wood, you never know with the Supreme Court.
You never know.
And of course, it's an election-related case, so things get always a little bit weirder with the courts on election cases. My suspicion is they didn't like the idea of Trump challenging elections.
Yeah.
And that has impacted their theory of standing in too many courts, that candidates, or frankly others who have the right to or should have the right to, can't get the time of day in courts. And of course, what the left says, 60 court decisions. A lot of those cases were thrown out for lack of standing and things like that.
Right.
And I'm not sure. I'm not saying all of that would be impacted by this particular lawsuit or this particular Supreme Court case, but it's important for the court, in our view, to affirm that certainly a federal candidate, a sitting member of Congress, should be able to challenge whether a state is complying with federal law in the way the election's being run.
What could be more American than protecting the will of the people? What could possibly be more American than that? All you're saying is, I want to make sure that the people's voice is accurately represented. That it has to be the most common sense thing in the world.
In California, they count ballots 7 days after Election Day that arrive 7 days after Election Day. When Trump had an EO kind of cementing the policy that...
Yes.
And he made the good point in EO. He goes, it's like a voter showing up 3 days after the polls close and saying, open them up, I want to vote.
Yes.
And but in California, 2 Democrats won, I quote marks for those of you just listening, not watching, and replaced 2 Republicans based on ballots that were counted that arrived after Election Day.
Mm-hmm.
So late arriving ballots, on our view under the law, were counted and changed the election results. If I were in the House, I'd be doing a whole host of hearings, and I think there's a basis to change those seats.
Yeah, in order to, again, accurately reflect the will of the voters who play by the rules. That's worth digging into. All right, well, look, Judicial Watch continues relentlessly to go after all of this. Doesn't matter who's in power, and that's why we like you. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Good to see you here,
Good
Tom,
to see
as
you.
always.
Thank you.
There's Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch. Thank you again to Tom, plowing ahead here.